So just to start out, Willy's Wonderland to the Accursed is a bit of a tonal shift. What made you want to tell this story next?
I read Rob Kennedy's script and I just loved it. I just thought that first 7 pages was its own movie in itself, and I just like, man, it'd be cool to do something different, a little more darker and sinister and a little more grounded. And working with, all of these great actors on these characters and making a kind of a compelling story about guilt and grief. And the idea of like the sins of the mothers visiting on their daughters, it just really spoke to me, all of it. So I was like, I got to do this.
Yeah, and building on that, the themes of grief and guilt are very prevalent in the film. What made you want to really dive into those ideas?
Well, it's interesting because, like, I'm taking care of my mom who's 91, and a lot of thoughts of that just kind of creep in, like I spend more time with her and things like that. And when I read the script about Ambrose and my wife's a nurse and Ellie's a nurse, and it just kind of some of these themes kind of hit home to me. And I just love the idea of making kind of a 70s vintage horror movie. Willy's was a love letter to the 80s, movies like Evil Dead that I loved, but the idea of making more of a grounding kind of a dealing with the mind, psychological horror film was very compelling.
For sure. And there's some really great and unsettling imagery all throughout the film, especially the hand in the mouth.
Yeah.
What was the process behind deciding what sort of visuals to create?
Um, I love the idea of the hand in the mouth. That was really exciting to me. And we did a prosthetic hand. Okay. So, but we also mapped it for the VFX. A great company, Entropic, did all the VFX for us. And it was just really cool. I want to make them as organic as possible. I used a lot of practical effects on this movie as well, and just kind of blend the things and try to make it as real as possible. Because I think a lot of movies get kind of bogged down in just all the VFX, and it's like a CGI fest. It looks more like a cut scenes from video games, and I didn't want that in this movie. And I knew we were making a serious film about serious subject matter, and so the VFX needed to be serious and feel real. So.
Yeah, I think the practical worked really well. The all the goo and slime really makes it feel more gross than like
Yeah.
digital blood and that sort of thing for sure.
Totally. Yeah. And
And
we
you
had a demon. We had a demon. We built that was Troy James, and
yeah.
we built the suit. Cinema Makeup School built the suit for us. Did a great job. And so yeah, and then we added with the goo and stuff. But then the VFX were like the flies and things like that.
Yeah.
So we augmented it, with VFX.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the demon. Like there's so many designs throughout whether like mythology or pop culture for demons. So how did you kind of land on what you wanted the demon to look like?
It's really interesting about that because I think the demon, it's they're dealing with demons right in the movie, and so the idea of now we have manifested into a physical form. It's like, how do you do that, right? And so there was a lot of, Dave McAdoo was the artist. He did a lot of concept drawings with this. Just did a fantastic job, and we went through it and said, I like this part, I don't like this, and everything. But at the end of the day, it was really about what the demon does to the world. It affects, right? When he comes from his world into, let's say, the real world or the cabin world in our movie, it's what does he do to those people around him? And so that's why I did that whole, I call it the demon shake, where you do the demon POV. What we did a VFX where the image would do like the image shaker as he'd come in, and you have that low bass rumble. I researched the thing on low frequency. A good friend of mine, Scott Harbor, he's the executive producer of this movie, and he was telling me about these low frequencies in horror movies. And I started doing this research, and it's true. It's like this low bass hum, and it kind of unnerves the spirit a little bit. And sometimes they do it where you can't even really hear it, and sometimes it's a little more prevalent. And I just thought, man, that's the way the demon has his own kind of score, right? His own vibe to it. It's just, it's the sound is part of that extension of the physical form. So where we're shaking that image, and then we're doing that demon hum or the demon bass, and just trying to bring his world into the real world and the cabin world. It was just felt very kind of invasive, and that's kind of what the scene's about, right? It's about these women getting invaded, and I think that's one of the scariest things for women too, is like, being invaded without their consent, right? And that's kind of what's going on. And so I also wanted to manifest that physically and emotionally and visually. And that's kind of where we all kind of came together with all those things. So
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And you mentioned like the sins of the mother allowing for an almost all female cast. So what did that opportunity and experience mean for you?
oh, it was great. I was raised by a single mom, and I had two sisters, and I've been married for over 20 years. I have a daughter who's 16. So that wasn't I mean, it was a challenge in a way, but it really wasn't. I mean, I understood, I understood the characters. Rob Kennedy wrote a great script, so I kind of understood where he was going with it. And what I liked about it too is very organic. It wasn't a movie where, oh, well, these were guys and they changed it or this or that, or they're talking about their boyfriends, but it just felt real and it felt natural, and that's one thing I really liked about the project. So I wanted to keep that organic integrity through shooting the movie and finishing the movie.
Absolutely. And there's a lot of both jump scares and there's a more slow crawling sense of dread and horror throughout The Accursed. Is it difficult to balance these different types of scares and figure out when to use what?
Yeah, and the thing is, I'm not a big fan of jump scares. Sometimes I think they're cheap. They could be really cool. They're really good, but sometimes I feel like, okay, we've seen that or done that. My feeling on the Accursed was I wanted to get an emotional tone. I wanted to get a sense of dread. I wanted to get a sense of unsettlement and just unease as you watch this movie, and mood and atmosphere thick. And that was, I love movies like that. And so that's what I really wanted to bring to the Accursed, is just this from frame one to the end. It's like kind of this unsettling, atmospheric, moody piece, and so yeah, the jump scares were interesting, but I was more, and the thing is, the emotion of what the characters are going through, that's also creating the mood, right? That's creating the atmosphere. So all those kind of had to blend in and kind of go hand in hand with each other.
Yeah, that makes sense. And is there a particular message or feeling that you hope people come away from The Accursed with?
It's really cool because I love making movies where you kind of have to think about it, a little bit. And the message for me is just that, you can't live with the guilt, you can't live with the regret. It will eat you alive. And that you need to confront your demons, and that's what we talking about in the movie. And one of my favorite things a friend of mine said was, "It doesn't catch up to you till it catches up to you." And that's kind of what's going on with Elly, right? She cannot confront her demons. She's kind of mired in this regret and in this deep, deep sorrow about her mother and guilt, and it kind of eats her alive. And if she didn't do that, and if she kind of maybe sought help, like Beth suggests, or kind of worked out in a positive manner, none of this maybe would have happened, right? So I think we all have our own demons that we have to face, and if we don't face them now, we're going to face them later. And it's better to just rip off the band-aid and face them now. So that's kind of what and the idea of history, right? The sins of the mothers, like I said, the song, the Sting song, "History Will Teach Us Nothing," really kind of was in my mind when I was making this film, because it's like these characters, Sadie and Elly, they're on the path of becoming their mother. And it's like, but the generational trauma, but if we could stop that, and talk about it and kind of, move on from that and not keep these things that chain us emotionally, we can evolve and I feel better person, right? And then help the next generation not to repeat the same mistakes. I like to tell my kids, you know, you're going to make mistakes, but I don't want you to make mine. And here are mine. And I want you to learn from them. So then you're going to make your own, but you just don't make mine, because don't repeat what I did. And that's kind of the theme of The Accursed, right? Is they're repeating what their mothers did, and it needs to stop.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And between earlier I mentioned the tonal shift between the two movies, but also like what did you learn from making Willy's Wonderland that you were able to apply in The Accursed?
Gosh, yeah, you're right. Every movie you learn, right, from things. And there's the practical things about filmmaking in terms of like, get your days and all that stuff, that fun stuff, but more emotionally. And I think, Spencer, it's interesting because, I came down with COVID,
Mhm.
and I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. And when I came out, Willy's was just coming out. And, when you're facing death like I did, you really change, right? Things just are not the same. And I really learned to kind of just take life, carpe diem, live every day, enjoy every moment, enjoy every breath. I really try to do that and try to be centered. And so it's interesting because I made Willy's, but then I went through this horrendous experience and I kind
Yeah.
of changed. So to say, what did I learn from Willy's to this? Willy's in a way feels long ago because of what happened with me. And so really I took what happened to me and what I learned from that and did the Accursed. Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. That's a really interesting perspective too.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so in Willie's, like, was you have a silent Nicolas Cage, which is crazy. Was
Yeah.
that always the
Yeah.
idea that he wouldn't speak?
Yeah, so I got the script. Geo Parsons wrote a great script, and I got the script, and he didn't speak until the very end. He had one line, but I always felt like, if you do that, that line really needs to be powerful. It needs to be epic. And Nick and I talked about it, and he felt that the animals, the animatronics were trash. They were beneath him, and he didn't need to speak. And I said I agreed. So we kind of just cut that and went to make a movie that he didn't speak through the whole film. There's
Awesome.
that scene where he comes out of the kitchen and I do that push in, and I think that's kind of, I'm trying to trick the audience of, okay, here comes the one liner, here comes the 80s cheese line, or the groovy line, and we push in and then we just hold it and then nothing, and I kind of like that. So
Yeah, that kind of subversion's a lot of fun.
yeah. Yeah.
And my last question, it applies to Willie's and to the Cursed,
Yeah.
is it difficult to balance horror with comedy and find the right tone? Because they're both such distinct tones.
Yeah, you're right. But what's funny is what happens, right, when some people laugh sometimes is they're kind of anxious or kind of unsettled, right? So they laugh, right, to kind of let it go. So as much as you think horror and comedy are like, they're not in the same universe, they kind of are, right? It's an
Yeah.
emotional response. So I always feel that you got to get to the truth. You got to get to the truth with the characters, just like with Nick when he said, these animatronics are trash. I'm not talking to them. That was his truth, right? That's what he really believed. And so when you get to the truth with the actors and with Mena and Sarah on the Accursed, and Alexis and Meg, and it's like, okay, this is what Miss Ambrose is going to do, and this is what she wouldn't do, and you really start narrowing down the characters, then things start to evolve, and then the truth and the reality starts coming into play, and then you can start playing with things, then you can start finding the humor in things. And it was great because we rehearsed, and it's like, oh, that thing with like Mina and Sarah DeMont, Beth and Alma, they just never like each other in the movie. You could just feel it, and they were just riffing off one another. It was just great because I loved, let's do it this way, let's add a little this, so it's all kind of workshopping it and just trying to get it to where you feel that, okay, now we're telling a complete story, and it's got hills and valleys, right? And it's not this kind of one thing, that it kind of has peaks, and it goes up and it goes down, and it kind of just feels natural, and that's kind of where it needs to be. So